My name is Amir. I am 34 years old, and on March 22nd, 2016, I committed an act that should have destroyed my life forever. I had just stepped off a 14-hour flight from Dubai to Atlanta, exhausted but proud of another flawless journey. I was a senior commercial pilot, respected, disciplined, and devout, a man who prayed 5 times a day, who memorized entire surahs of the Quran, who believed with absolute certainty that he was defending the truth. And yet, that day, in a dim maintenance corridor behind Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, I held 3 Christian Bibles in my hands like they were contaminated objects and set them on fire. I watched the flames curl through the thin pages. I watched ink melt into ash. I watched highlighted verses and handwritten notes disappear into black dust. And I felt righteous. I felt like a warrior protecting my faith from corruption. Every spark that rose into the cold evening air felt like a victory. I never imagined those flames were burning down the life I thought I understood. When the last wisp of smoke dissolved above the dumpster, I believed I had done something holy. I wiped my hands, returned to the crew rest area, unrolled my prayer rug, and prayed with the confidence of a man who thought God was pleased with him. I had no idea heaven was watching me with a completely different intention, an intention that would break me, expose me, pursue me, and transform me in ways beyond imagination. If you had told me that afternoon that within days my flight instruments would malfunction only under my touch, that storms no meteorologist predicted would appear only on my radar, that nightmares would stalk me every night, that my prayers would suddenly lose their power, that my mind and body would feel hunted, I would have laughed. I was a man of logic, a pilot trained in precision, a Muslim certain of his path, but the God I thought I was serving was already writing an entirely different story. I believed the fire I lit in Atlanta was the end of those 3 Bibles. What I didn't know was that the real fire, the one God himself had ignited, was only beginning inside me. And it would burn through everything I trusted, everything I believed, everything I worshipped. It would take me to the edge of death, to the edge of sanity, to the edge of a storm thousands of feet above the earth, just so I could finally meet the one I never expected to encounter. I thought I understood God, but on March 22nd, 2016, the day I burned 3 Bibles, my real story began. I was born in Damascus, a city layered with ancient stone, morning prayers echoing from every minaret, and generations of devotion carved into its very air. My earliest memories are of my father waking before dawn, the rasp of his voice rehearsing the adhan, and the soft rustle of my mother preparing her Quran lesson plans. My father, Imam Hassan, was respected not only for his scholarship but for the gravity of his presence. When he walked into a room, men straightened their posture and boys lowered their gaze. My mother, Amira, embodied gentleness wrapped in discipline. She taught young girls to recite the Quran with precision, correcting their tajweed with the slightest lift of her eyebrow. In my community, my family's name was synonymous with spiritual excellence, and from the moment I could speak, I was expected to continue that legacy. While other boys chased soccer balls through dusty streets, I was seated cross-legged on prayer rugs memorizing surahs. By age 7, visitors would come to our home and ask my father to let the gifted boy recite. I would stand straight, clear my throat, and deliver verses with crisp accuracy. The elders would nod approvingly, and my father's pride would shine through the sternness of his face. They said Allah had favored me. They said I had a calling, and I believed them. But with every compliment came a weight. If I hesitated in recitation, my father's eyes sharpened. If I mispronounced a syllable during prayer, he corrected me publicly. I grew up learning that love and approval were won through perfection. There was no room for weakness, no margin for uncertainty. I learned to project confidence even when my heart trembled. I learned to obey long before I learned to question. By the time I reached adolescence, my identity was welded to religious performance. I fasted not only during Ramadan, but on extra days, my father encouraged me to acts of righteousness. I prayed before dawn beside him in the mosque, feeling the cold marble under my knees while the rest of the city slept. My peers admired me, but they also feared disappointing me. I had unknowingly become a symbol, a young man who represented what every Muslim boy should aspire to be. And when an entire community looks at you as their example, you learn to wear a mask so perfect that even you begin to believe it. My dream of becoming a pilot emerged strangely, not from rebellion, but from devotion. At 13, during Eid prayers, I watched an airplane cross the sky in a clean silver line. I imagined myself flying it, soaring above the clouds, closer to heaven. The idea was intoxicating. To guide people safely across continents felt noble. To transport pilgrims to Mecca felt holy. I told my father that evening that I wanted to become a pilot. He didn't smile, but he also didn't refuse. If Allah wills it, he said. And for the first time, I sensed a door opening that belonged to me. When civil war broke out in Syria, my family relocated to Dubai. The city dazzled me with its impossible architecture and relentless ambition. It was there that I enrolled in a flight academy, devouring physics, navigation, and aviation systems with the same hunger I once applied to memorizing scripture. When I earned my commercial license in 2004, I fell to the ground in sujood, weeping. Becoming a pilot felt like stepping into Allah's favor. My career accelerated quickly. Emirates Airline hired me as a junior pilot, and within years I was flying long-haul international routes, Dubai to London, Dubai to New York, Dubai to Atlanta. I loved everything about the profession, the discipline, the precision, the responsibility, but I loved one thing more, praying at 35,000 feet. There was something transcendent about facing Mecca while the world below shrank into soft shadows. Up there, the sky felt hollow and endless, and for brief moments I believed I was closer to God. My spiritual discipline remained impressive. I never missed prayer. I avoided alcohol and secular distractions common among flight crews. My colleagues respected me as the devout one, the one who carried a prayer rug in his flight bag, the one who spoke about Allah's blessings with conviction. My fiancée, Fatima, admired my devotion. She came from a religious family as well, and our conversations often revolved around theology, duty, and children we hoped would one day memorize the Quran as I had. From the outside, my life was flawless. A prestigious career, a beautiful future wife, financial stability, family pride, and religious certainty carved into every part of my identity. I was living the life every Muslim man was taught to desire. And yet, in the quiet moments, late at night, in hotel rooms far from home, or during long flights over the Atlantic, I sometimes felt a strange hollowness. I didn't dare speak of it. I didn't dare analyze it. I simply silenced it with more prayer, more discipline, more devotion. If anyone had asked me then who I was, I would have answered confidently, a good man, a faithful Muslim, a respected pilot, a son my parents could trust. But life has a way of testing identities built on performance, and mine was about to collapse in ways I could never have predicted. The strange unraveling began quietly, almost subtly, as though reality itself were shifting in small, imperceptible ways. At first, I blamed stress, jet lag, overwork, anything but the possibility that something supernatural was touching my life. But deep down, beneath layers of discipline and denial, a shadow of uneasiness began to grow. The first incident happened during a routine pre-flight inspection. I was in the cockpit, running through the standard procedure, checking navigation readings and fuel calculations. Everything looked normal until I placed my hand on the primary navigation panel. The GPS coordinates flickered wildly, jumping from our location in Dubai to impossible coordinates over the Pacific Ocean. My co-pilot, Ahmed, leaned over and frowned. That's strange. But when he touched the same controls, the readings stabilized instantly, as though the aircraft itself recognized we were two different men. We tried again. When I touched the panel, chaos. When he did perfect order, the aircraft mechanics were puzzled. They ran diagnostics, replaced components, and assured me everything was functioning correctly. Even the engineering reports confirmed normalcy. But the moment I resumed the controls, the system faltered again. No one could explain it, and I didn't dare mention the Bible incident. I wasn't ready to connect the dots. Not yet. Over the next flights, the disturbances multiplied. Sometimes the autopilot would disengage by itself, forcing me to take manual control during turbulence. At other times, internal alarms would shriek for no reason, engine temperature, hydraulic pressure, cabin pressure warnings blinking like strobe lights before fading back to normal the moment someone else touched the controls. My colleagues began to whisper, "It's always when Amir is flying." Maybe he's overworked. Maybe he's losing focus. Their questions seeped into my own thoughts. Was I losing focus? Was something wrong with me? But how could the instruments malfunction in ways that defied physics only when my hands were involved? Fear began curling quietly around my thoughts like smoke slipping under a door. Then came the nightmares. They began 2 nights after the Bible burning. I saw flames everywhere, flames devouring books, flames licking at my hands, flames roaring across desert sands. Sometimes I saw my own face illuminated by the fire, distorted by shadows that twisted into shapes of men I couldn't recognize. I always woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering as if I had run for miles. Worse than the dreams was the smell. Even hours after waking, I could smell smoke, sharp, acrid, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my hands. I searched my apartment every night, convinced something had caught fire, but there was nothing. The scent was coming from me, or from somewhere that followed me, somewhere I didn't understand. During prayer, my concentration dissolved. Verses I had recited effortlessly since childhood suddenly slipped away like water through fingers. My tongue stumbled over Arabic syllables that had once come as naturally as breathing. At the mosque, I felt eyes on me. My imam pulled me aside once, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You seem troubled, Amir. Your spirit feels unsettled." I forced a smile and blamed exhaustion, but I didn't tell him that. Sometimes, during sujood, I felt an oppressive heaviness pressing down on me, as though I weren't praying alone, as though something unseen was listening and not approving. Fatima sensed it too. She would ask, "Are you okay? You sound distant." And I always answered yes, though everything inside me screamed no. She encouraged me to take leave from work, to reset spiritually, but rest didn't help. The more I prayed, the more my mind felt like a storm of tangled wires. The more I tried to steady myself, the more everything slipped out of my control. Then came the flight to London, the moment when whispers of uneasiness grew into undeniable terror. Midway over Europe, electrical systems began shutting down at first, one by one, then in chaotic clusters. Screens went black. Alarms shrieked. For several seconds, we were flying half blind. Passengers never knew how close they were to disaster, but my co-pilot did. He looked at me with something between fear and accusation. When we finally landed in Frankfurt under emergency protocol, investigators swarmed the aircraft. Yet, again, every system checked out perfectly afterward. Not a single mechanical explanation, not a single faulty component. After that, pilots began requesting not to be assigned flights with me. It was subtle at first, then open. I felt their fear. I felt their judgment. And I felt something else, something cold, calculated, closing in around me. My world, once so orderly, disciplined, and predictable, was collapsing into a maze of shadows and questions I had no answers for. There was a moment, late one night, when I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my trembling hands. I whispered into the silence, "What is happening to me?" But no answer came, only the faint smell of smoke drifting through the air, as though the fire I lit in Atlanta was still burning somewhere just out of sight. April 3rd, 2016, began as a routine flight day, nothing unusual, nothing ominous, nothing to warn me that before midnight I would face the most terrifying moments of my life. Emirates Flight EK 217, Dubai to Atlanta, was a route I had flown dozens of times. I knew the air corridors, the weather patterns, the oceanic transitions. The aircraft felt like an extension of my own body. I walked into the cockpit with the confidence of a man who believed discipline could control every outcome. I had no idea how wrong I was. For the first 6 hours, everything unfolded smoothly. Passengers were relaxed, the cabin crew joked in low voices, and the engines hummed their steady rhythm. My co-pilot that day was Sarah Mitchell, a competent American pilot who carried herself with quiet professionalism. "Easy flight tonight," she said. I nodded. I wanted to believe her, but a tightness had been pressing at the back of my mind all day, a whisper of dread I couldn't explain. As we approached European airspace, things changed. The weather radar displayed turbulence patches and scattered storm fronts, unusual but not alarming. We adjusted course slightly, but then the radar began showing storm formations so massive, so high, that they defied meteorological reality. Sarah frowned at the screen. This can't be right. There's nothing like this on the reports. I contacted air traffic control for confirmation. They insisted the skies ahead were clear. Yet my instruments said otherwise. Static erupted through the radios whenever I spoke. When Sarah transmitted, her voice came through perfectly. When I tried, the crackling swallowed every syllable. Then came the turbulence, violent shakes that rattled the overhead compartments and made passengers gasp. We climbed. It got worse. We descended. Still worse. The storm on our radar expanded in unnatural patterns, swallowing everything ahead. Our navigation systems followed next. The primary GPS began spinning out nonsense, showing us jumping hundreds of miles in fractions of a second. The backup systems contradicted each other. Even the inertial navigation drifted into impossible readings. For the first time in my career, I felt completely blind in the sky, and I knew deep, sickeningly, that this wasn't mechanical failure. Something was interfering with me. Fuel became a crisis next. A holding pattern was issued due to weather over Atlanta, usually manageable. But every alternate airport within range was suddenly reporting wind shear, lightning, or zero visibility. Sarah's voice grew tense. We're running out of options. I calculated remaining fuel, 25 minutes. That was the moment my heartbeat changed. It slowed, heavy and deliberate, like my body was bracing itself for impact. The passengers had no idea how close they were to death, but I did. I pictured 261 souls, all entrusted to me, plummeting into darkness because I could no longer control the aircraft or the world around me. A suffocating wave of guilt hit my chest. Sweat trickled down my spine. My hands trembled on the yoke. In that moment, a terrifying certainty settled over me. This is because of me, because of what I did, because I burned those Bibles. The cockpit shrank around me, walls pressing inward. Alarms blared, screens flickered, turbulence slammed us sideways, hard enough to fling Sarah's pen across the console. She grabbed the overhead handle, her knuckles white. Amir, we need to decide now. We have minutes. I tried to respond, but my throat closed. My vision blurred. The smell of smoke, the same phantom scent from my nightmares flooded my senses. My breath hitched in shallow gasps. I felt the crushing weight of every sin, every arrogance, every moment I believed I was defending God by destroying something sacred. My voice broke into a whisper I had never spoken before, a plea scraping up from the deepest part of my soul. God, if you are real, where are you? Please do something. It wasn't the polished Arabic of my daily prayers. It wasn't ritual. It wasn't performance. It was raw, trembling, and desperate. A man stripped of pride, stripped of certainty, stripped of every illusion of control. At 11:47 p.m., I believed I was about to die. I believed everyone on board was about to die. And for the first time in my life, I admitted that I was powerless, completely, utterly powerless. I didn't know then that my cry had reached someone. And I didn't know that the answer was already on its way. Not in the form of a storm clearing, but in the voice of a savior I had spent my life rejecting. The moment after my whispered plea, the cockpit fell into an uncanny silence, not the natural quiet between alarms, but a stillness so absolute, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The turbulence hadn't stopped. The storm still loomed across our radar like a monstrous shadow. Yet inside the cockpit, time seemed to slow, as if something unseen had stepped into the room. I glanced at Sarah. She was focused on the instruments, fear tightening her jaw, completely unaware of the shift I felt deep in my bones. Then it happened. A voice, calm, steady, unmistakably authoritative, spoke through the aircraft's intercom. Not the radio, not the cockpit speakers. The intercom meant for internal crew communication. Turn left, heading 180, descend to 8,000 feet. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't from any pilot, flight attendant, ground control, or passenger. It carried no accent, no strain, no panic. It was the kind of voice that expected obedience, not because it demanded it, but because it emanated a certainty that transcended fear. Sarah's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Was that ATC?" she asked. I checked the radios, nothing. The transmission logs empty. The frequency indicators silent. No signal had come in. The voice had appeared from nowhere. But the strangest part wasn't where it came from, it was what it did to me. The moment it spoke, the panic that had clenched my chest loosened, my hands steadied, my breathing deepened. A warmth, faint but undeniable, spread through me, like the first rays of dawn breaking over a dark horizon. Following an unverified command from an unidentified source violated every aviation protocol I had ever learned. But something inside me, something beyond logic or training, knew the instruction was trustworthy. I adjusted the heading. Sarah hesitated but didn't stop me. As we began the descent, the impossible happened. One by one, the instruments stopped their erratic behavior. The altimeter stabilized. The navigation displays synchronized. The radar, which moments earlier showed a catastrophic storm system, now revealed a clear pathway slicing through the chaos. Sarah stared in disbelief. This can't be right. Weather doesn't change like this. She was correct. It wasn't meteorology. It was intervention. With every mile we descended, the turbulence weakened until it disappeared entirely. The sky below us opened like a vast, steady ocean of calm. Atlanta's runway lights shimmered faintly in the distance, an impossible sight given the reports we had been receiving only minutes earlier. But the strangest shift wasn't in the sky, it was inside me. A thought surfaced, a quiet admission I wasn't ready to voice. Someone had guided us. Someone had seen us. Someone had answered my desperate cry. I didn't understand it. I didn't believe Christians worshiped the true God. I didn't believe the Bible was trustworthy. I certainly didn't believe Jesus was divine. Yet the voice that spoke carried a peace unlike anything I had ever known, not the stern approval I sought from Allah, not the pride of religious achievement, not the fleeting comfort of ritual, but something warmer, deeper, alive. The seed was planted not through a sermon, not through a missionary, not through a book, but through a voice that pierced the storm and my heart in the same breath. As we approached final descent, I kept replaying the moment over and over. A voice without origin, a command without contradiction, a peace without explanation. I didn't know it yet, but this was the first whisper of Jesus, the first fracture in the walls I had built my entire life. And once a wall cracks, no matter how strong, the light will find a way through. The landing itself should have consumed all my attention, yet my mind remained fixed on that voice, disembodied, authoritative, and impossibly peaceful. As the wheels touched down on the Atlanta runway at 12:23 a.m., applause erupted from the cabin behind us. Passengers believed we had navigated heroically through a storm, but inside the cockpit, I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to understand what had just happened. My hands trembled over the controls as though recognizing they were no longer responsible for the miracle we had just survived. Sarah unbuckled her harness. "Ahmed, are you okay?" I nodded, but the truth hovered in the air like a ghost. I was not okay. Something had shattered inside me. When the passengers disembarked, I remained seated, staring at the dark windshield. The terminal lights reflected faintly on the glass, appearing distorted, almost halo-like. My heart thudded in uneasy rhythms, as if preparing itself for something I didn't yet know was coming. The cockpit, normally filled with sterile hums and mechanical vibrations, felt charged alive like a held breath. Then the temperature shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't freezing or blazing, but the air grew dense, weighted with a presence my spirit recognized before my mind could comprehend. I lifted my gaze, and that was when I saw him. A figure stood to my right, no movement, no sound, just presence. He wore simple white garments, radiant without blinding, bright without burning. His face was unlike anything I had ever seen on earth, strong yet gentle, grave yet overflowing with compassion. His eyes were the first thing I truly saw. They held galaxies of understanding, oceans of sorrow, and the warmth of a father who has found a long-lost child. I had never seen him before, yet I knew him instantly. My soul knew him. My heart recognized what my theology had denied: Jesus. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every belief I had built my identity upon, that he was only a prophet, that Christians were deceived, that the Bible was corrupted, crumbled silently beneath the weight of his presence. He didn't speak at first, yet something inside me felt as if he had already spoken volumes. The cockpit filled with peace so profound it pressed tears into my eyes. Not the peace of silence, not the peace of control, but the peace of being known, completely, painfully, lovingly known. Then he spoke not aloud, not through sound waves, but into the deepest part of my being, bypassing every intellect and defense. I was with you. 3 words, yet they broke me. My breath hitched as the realization unfurled. The voice that saved the aircraft had been his. The peace that steadied my hands had been his. The intervention, the impossible clearing in the storm, it had all been him. He stepped closer. The light around him intensified, but his nearness didn't scorch, it healed. I felt years of fear, pride, striving, and spiritual exhaustion unravel inside me. He showed me not through visions, but through knowing how long he had been watching me, how he had seen my childhood obedience, my desperate attempts to earn God's love, my perfectionism, my hidden emptiness. He saw the boy kneeling beside his father in the mosque, longing for closeness with a God he feared, and he saw the man who burned Bibles believing it made him righteous. Amir, his voice whispered within me, you were never mine to punish, you were mine to love. My knees buckled. I fell into the pilot seat, tears blurring everything. No imam had ever spoken with such tenderness. No prayer had ever filled me with such love. No ritual had ever touched the part of me now breaking open under his gaze. I felt seen not for my actions, but for my soul. You were never meant to live in fear, he continued. You were never meant to earn what I freely give. You were never alone. My hands covered my face as I sobbed deep, ragged sobs that tore through layers of pride I didn't know I carried. I expected rebuke for burning his word. Instead, he offered forgiveness before I could even ask for it, love before confession, grace before repentance. When I finally lifted my eyes, he was still watching me with the tenderness of someone who knew everything about me yet wanted me anyway. His final words that night washed over me like a warm tide. I came to save you. And just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. The cockpit returned to normal, the air thinning back into silence. But nothing inside me was normal anymore. Jesus had stepped into my world, into my cockpits, and nothing in my life, nothing in my faith, nothing in my identity would ever be the same again. The hours following the encounter in the cockpit felt unreal, as though I were walking through a world made of fragile glass, where every step echoed with the memory of his voice. I returned to my hotel room in Atlanta with trembling hands, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to pretend that anything in my life was normal anymore. The presence of Jesus lingered soft, steady, unmistakably alive, like a whisper brushing against the inside of my chest. I tried to perform my Fajr prayer at dawn, but the words felt hollow, collapsing in my mouth before they could form. For the first time in decades, I wasn't praying to a distant deity, but wrestling with the reality of a God who had just spoken to me face to face. The next 3 days in Atlanta became a quiet storm inside my soul. I wandered the streets in a daze, searching for answers I couldn't articulate. I passed a small church with its doors open, and something pulled me inside, not forcefully, but gently, like a hand guiding me through my confusion. An elderly pastor named Williams approached me with a kindness that felt disarming. When he asked if I needed prayer, I broke down in tears before I could stop myself. I told him carefully about the voice on the aircraft, about the peace that followed, about the presence in the cockpit. I expected him to look at me like I was insane. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, Jesus is calling you." It felt like the final key in a lock that had been turning for years. He gave me a Bible, the same kind of book I had burned with my own hands. I held it like a fragile artifact, afraid of what it meant, ashamed of what I had done. That night, alone in my hotel room, I opened it. The words hit me like living fire. The Gospel of John. The tenderness of Jesus' voice in every chapter. The truth that felt sharper than any blade I had ever carried in my heart. When I reached John 14-6, I am the way and the truth and the life, it felt like Jesus himself was speaking it directly into my ribs. I fell to my knees, not facing Mecca, not reciting ritual, just kneeling as a broken man before a God who had come looking for him. I whispered, "Jesus, if you are real, if you truly came for me, save me." And the peace that washed over me was the same peace I had felt in the cockpit, only stronger, deeper, final. It was as if chains I had worn my entire life fell silently away. I knew with absolute certainty that I belonged to him now. but following Jesus cost me everything. When I returned to Dubai, I tried to hide the change in me, but light cannot stay hidden. Fatima noticed immediately. I avoided prayers. My confidence in Islamic doctrine had evaporated. One evening, shaking with fear, I told her the truth. I had met Jesus. Her expression hardened into something I had never seen before. Fear, anger, and disbelief welded together. By the next morning, her father had informed mine. Within hours, my entire family knew. My father's voice over the phone was colder than ice. You are no longer my son. My mother's silence in the background was worse than any scream. My siblings blocked me. My extended family cut ties. To them, I had not converted, I had died. The consequences spread quickly. Fellow Muslim pilots refused to fly with me. Emirates launched internal reviews, not officially about my faith, but thinly veiled. Within weeks, I was encouraged to resign. I lost my job, my fiancé, my home, my family, and my community in one sweeping collapse. Yet, even in the ruins, Jesus was still building something new. An American airline heard my story through a Christian contact and offered me training and employment. I relocated to Atlanta, the very city where I had once burned Bibles. Pastor Williams helped me find housing, a church community, and a circle of believers who understood the cost of following Christ. Healing came slowly, but steadily. I remarried a Christian woman whose kindness felt like a balm poured over years of spiritual wounds. Together we built a family rooted not in performance, but in grace. And the miracle didn't end there. 4 years after burning those Bibles, I returned to the same hidden maintenance alley behind Terminal E. This time, my hands were full, not with books I intended to destroy, but with boxes of Bibles to give away. I stood in the same place where I once acted in anger, now filled with a joy impossible to explain. What I had burned in ignorance, I now carried as life. What I once despised, I now cherished. Only Jesus could turn a Bible burner into a Bible bearer. The man I had been was gone. A miracle had happened. And my escape from darkness was complete, not because I ran, but because Jesus had found me. Today, when I wake up in my home in Atlanta, sunlight spilling across the floor, my 2 children laughing in the next room, and my wife humming worship songs in the kitchen, I often pause just to breathe in the miracle of it all. Not a single piece of my old life remains, yet somehow, for the first time, I feel whole. The man who once lived in fear of failing a distant God has been replaced by someone who walks in the steady assurance of being loved. I no longer pray 5 times a day out of obligation. Now I speak with Jesus throughout the day as naturally as breathing. I no longer strive to earn salvation. Now I live from the freedom of knowing it has already been given. The guilt that once stalked me has dissolved. The shame that once defined me has been washed away. The emptiness I tried to silence for decades has been filled with a presence so real, so gentle, so constant that I cannot imagine life without him. I lost my family, my fiancé, my reputation, my nation, and the identity I carried since childhood. But what I gained is beyond anything this world can measure. I found peace that doesn't collapse under pressure. I found hope that doesn't fade in darkness. I found a love that doesn't depend on my perfection. I found a father who doesn't abandon his children. And most of all, I found Jesus, the one who stepped into my cockpit when I was seconds from disaster, the one who spoke into my soul when I had no strength left to pray, the one who gave his life long before I ever knew his name. And now, I carry his story wherever I go. As an airline chaplain, I meet pilots, flight attendants, maintenance workers, and travelers from every nation, every religion, every background. Some come to me quietly, asking about the peace they see in my eyes. Some share their heavy burdens. Some whisper questions they've been too afraid to ask anyone else. And every time, I tell them what I'm telling you now. Jesus is not far. He is not silent. He is not waiting for you to be perfect. He comes into storms. He comes into cockpits. He comes into hotel rooms and broken hearts and lives collapsing under the weight of their own strength. He comes for you. So look into your own heart for a moment. What storm are you flying through? What guilt are you carrying? What questions haunt you in the quiet hours of the night? If Jesus could rescue a Muslim pilot who burned his word, he can rescue anyone, even you, especially you. All he asks is that you call his name. If you're watching or listening and you need prayer, write it in the comments. If you're searching for God, tell us where you're watching from. And if you want more testimonies of what Jesus is doing around the world, make sure you subscribe. Your story isn't over. The same Jesus who saved me is ready to step into your life, calm your storm, and lead you into a future filled with hope, freedom, and unshakable love.